out there.
One group this disease could impact on particularly is the large number of Māori growers, processors and workers.
Obviously we're all a big part of the big machinery of the industry and will be affected just like anybody else, but as you suggested, there's some areas that are a bit different to us because most of our orchards are iwi or hapu owned or family owned, and some of them have over 1,000 owners, so the downstream effect of that money being flown back to our Māori community would have certainly significant impacts. And this pack house here that we're in today, the majority of the workforce are local Māori, generally tied up with the orchard. So yeah, a lot of that distribution is coming back to our people, even through areas such as education and the like. So the enterprise is actually probably a lot different than the normal investment in kiwifruit orchards that we're familiar with. Everybody's very concerned about this issue and what the flow-on effects might have. To date, touch wood, we haven't had any orchards of our own affected. Not to say they haven't come up with, haven't been identified yet or aren't going to get it, but we've been relatively lucky that we haven't been. But of course, there's a whole lot of downstream effects just from those being affected. What that might mean globally, it seems that we're all right, but we're all part of this big brand, and so. I guess we're all associated with one way or another, but I mean, yes, our communities are certainly very concerned about it, so much so that we hosted our own meeting of Māori growers here on Friday, which was attended by the Minister of Agriculture, our local MPs, the Māori Party, and all the industry leaders. So we had a very big turnout from the industry, and as you appreciate, the majority of the growers are in the Bay of Plenty, so we had them coming from as far west to Te Kaha, and obviously in Te Poki and Tauranga where the lion's share is. But it's not even limited to here. We know Ngāti Hine, our relations from up north, who are big in forestry, have bought four orchards in the Kirikiri area. So yeah, it's big right through for us.
The big question has been, how did PSA get here? Imports of pollen from infected countries for artificial pollination are one source rumoured as a carrier of the bacteria, which Ross Hart says should be investigated. MAF is doing just that.
It's a plant product, and I believe that is possibly one avenue. Also, the orchards that are affected, we can't control vermin, and at this time of the year with natural pollination and bees, there's no stopping it. Now, as a group, we are really disappointed that there was even the opportunity that pollen from infected countries could have even been contemplated being imported, and it has been imported and it has been used. And like a lot of information about this, it's hard to confirm, but I've had it on pretty good authority that the affected orchards, a percentage of them have been artificially pollinated. Right. Whether it's imported pollen or not, I'm not sure, but once the infections and the environment, it's rampant.
The question of how PSA got here, however, is taking a back seat to the more pressing issue of how to handle it now it is here. Is it realistic to even contemplate total eradication?
I would be doubtful of that, although I qualify that by saying an aggressive management strategy initially may lead us to a point where eradication is then not an unreasonable thing to consider. As we sit here today, my view would be that eradication is unlikely.
PSA has been likened to foot and mouth, so there are calls to exterminate infected vines. But MAF and growers are also working on other ways to treat and dispose of plants that have fallen victim to the disease. But the prospect of financial ruin for affected orchardists is at the front of people's minds. Then there's the longer-term question of land values in the high-priced Bay of Plenty.
Not good, not good, and there's not going to be anybody with any intelligence that's going to get into the industry. That's so hard to measure, but one thing you can be sure of, it's going to be extremely negative.
What sort of feedback have you had from real estate people you know?
Well, I've had real estate agents contact me, and the first thing they've said to me is that any deal that was on the table at the time is now long gone. and lawyers aren't bothering pursuing them.
Welcome back. Next up, I join Doug Voss at his 29-hectare organic orchard outside Tauranga. We discuss his experience in Italy, where he watched 70% of the crop in Lazio destroyed. And we talk about the reaction by authorities here to our own homegrown crisis. Well, Doug, welcome to the Sector Report program here on Country 99 TV. Now, how has the industry handled this crisis, do you think?
Well, it's early days. We're only 10 days into it, and I think the industry is still trying to get over the shock. But I see, that we are starting to organise ourselves, and hopefully a plan will come out over the next day or so, which will give us clear direction. But we do have this history of being sensible and cooperative and collegial in our behaviour to each other, and I'm sure that's going to continue. So, but there's fear out there and people are concerned, and for the individual growers who have already got confirmed PSA on the orchard, be it a relatively small number, they're not feeling very happy, and that's very understandable.
One grower's described industry chiefs and MAF as floundering. Do you think that's a fair description of the reaction to this crisis?
I think, I tend to be an impatient person by nature, and I would have liked to see the really on-orchard control processes on the initial orchards sped up a bit, but that's driven by my knowledge of what happened in Italy. There's probably no expectation it was ever going to come here, and we do have a good history of keeping such evil things out of the country, but then again we don't know where it came from, how long it's been here, and all those things. So, a whole lot of unknowns and people coming to grips with it.
Is eradication off the agenda, or do you think it's a real possibility?
Eradication would be the ideal, but the reality is you're never going to get eradication until we get on top of the control. We've got to control the current infestations and remove them, and treat them in the most appropriate way. And I understand there's a recipe coming out for what you do with leaf spot compared with cane infection, and that's sensible. It's a matter of looking at each individual orchard. There's a lot of people running out there, bulldoze a lot. That's ridiculous. Bulldozing will spread the infection, and what you're doing, you're supposed to be removing the infection, disposing of it in a controlled way so it doesn't spread anywhere else, and then monitoring and keeping their eyes open, and this whole process is going to be very, very important.
Is burning the vines an option, do you think?
No, that was tried in Italy. They cut out the material, took it to a burning area, and great bonfire. All that happened is the infection goes up with the heat and then spreads out across the surrounding countryside. No, they're doing the right thing down in Te Puke. They're cutting it out, putting it in sealed plastic bags, and I understand MAF is making good progress in finding a controlled disposal method, which is absolutely essential.
There's been criticism that sterilisation of equipment like chainsaws and secateurs as they move between properties has been pretty slack. Is that fair comment?
Well, we haven't had a tradition of doing that. So this is a totally new world for the kiwifruit industry. We haven't had to deal with a contagious, infectious, durable disease like this before that can be transmitted relatively easily. So this will change the way we work our orchards, and perhaps that's a very important wake-up call, because there may be other challenges of some of the nature that come along in the future. At least we learned from this, and the first day it was all appeared. We had our people out there, they were disinfecting footwear on and off orchards, disinfecting their pruning tools and gear, vehicle movements were controlled, tractor movements, cleaning down tractors. That's all good. A lot of people could criticise and say, why weren't you doing that in the past? But the reality is...
Well, it's wisdom after the event.
Yeah, well, the reality was we haven't dealt with something like this before, so this is new.
Can you tell me about your involvement with the disaster in Italy?
My involvement was as somebody standing on the sidelines watching orchards go away, destroyed, being cut out, beautiful gold vines which were mature and fully producing, disappearing.
And people going out of business?
And growers losing their income. Italian growers tend to be growers of multiple crops, mixture of fruit crops, animal production, grain production. So that doesn't matter. That was a massive investment they'd made as individuals going down the tubes, and that was a really sad thing to say. So some people might not understand why I'm so passionate about what I'm seeing here and thinking I'm critical about things that may not be happening that should be happening. But when you see that happen in a situation where you had, suddenly healthy producing vines just going, it's devastating.
Could the industry and the bureaucracy have handled it better in Italy, do you think?
Well, they were totally absent from the process. I mean, even if they have an organisation also called MAF, and I understand it is a notifiable disease in Italy, their presence wasn't there. There was no requirements on people, no restriction orders, no orders written for the removal of contaminated material. Growers were largely left to their own devices, working with their suppliers and working with ZESPI to understand what they should do.
Do we have anything to learn from the Italian experience?
Yeah, and I think if going back to learning from mistakes is probably more in reference to that there is a good example of how not to do it. And I think people say, well, we're getting it right after 2 weeks, it's not a year or 18 months. So yeah, they're right. But there was a model there we can use, and perhaps if we had a plan based on the model. But then again, once again, did we ever believe it was going to come here? No.
Well, thanks very much for your time today, Doug.
You're welcome.
Doug Voss there, and that's our show. And remember, you can catch up with Sector Report on our website. Catch you next time.